Welcome to Good Game, your no BS insights for crypto founders.
Do you see any layer 2 that can compete with Mainnet performance-wise and fees-wise, or even has a path towards competing with Mainnet?
Our team is just writing software. So at the end of the day, like we always say this within our team, everything is just software. So yes, any other team could put in the effort to write really performant software that allows that blockchain, whether it's a layer 2 or a layer 1 or a layer 3.
But do you see any team that's really focusing on performance today among the layer 2 teams?
I don't.
What about Mega ETH?
I think that they've stated a desire to do that.
Okay.
I think it's still super early right now. So it's really hard to judge anything that they've done so far, but I think they have the right goal in mind.
Looking for your next startup idea in crypto? Check out our request for startups list and get inspired at alliance.xyz/ideas.
Are they going to pull a fake news this time?
Oh, do you remember that?
Oh,
They
SEC intern.
they hacked Gary Gensler, right? Oh no, the SEC's website, Twitter handle.
Yeah.
And then they hacked the SEC's right afterwards or something.
Cointelegraph Intern was the first to push it.
Yeah, someday
They hated him at first, but
It was
someday
vilified.
every brand will have an intern.
yeah, that's the future.
Yeah,
Biden's hiring one.
that intern
Yeah, I
handle
saw
is
that.
going to be crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah. So did you start this whole new trend?
I think I was the only intern.
Yes,
on Twitter
for
when I
CMS, right, Dan?
started. Yeah.
Yeah, and then MEV intern kind of made it a right. MEV intern was like the second.
Is it all recording, by the way?
There was, so mine was CMS intern, and then I want to say like within maybe 2 months, a few others popped up, and then there was like this.
And there's a lot of fake interns because then companies would create their own interns, and we knew there weren't
Yeah.
interns.
All interns.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's like that's one thing I've put out there before, where it's like it actually works better if you truly have like in we say intern, but like just young person kind of running it in general.
Yeah.
Because when it's like the
boomer.
the guy who's just used to running social media accounts since like 2010, and he's like, oh, I'm an intern now. Like it flows less naturally, I feel like.
But there's also like this, we'll talk about Monolithic next, but this is actually pretty interesting. But I mentioned this on our talk with Ansem yesterday, but a lot of large B2B companies are advertising through meme channels now. And that's becoming a huge inbound for customer acquisition, a funnel for them. And so like memes, interns, like this new generation is coming up and kind of like, changing the flow of how you acquire new customers now, which I find to be very interesting.
Yeah. I've thought about this probably way too much, honestly. Like way more than
you wrote a
anyone should
really
ever
long
spend.
tweet about this too. I shared it with Joe, who's our intern, but like the person that leads all of our media. But if you want to touch on that a bit.
Yeah, I think there's just like a shift in like user acquisition following just like moving up in the attention economy.
Yeah.
Like marketing for the last 50 years has very much been, you create advertisements that talk about your product and you put them in places where people expect ads, and that's just kind of how it works. Social media has changed that a bit, and probably in the last like 5 years, it's become very apparent. But it's, there were brand accounts and they would just like post whatever announcements or big events that they're doing. Or you would have like one thing I've pointed out is like there's Super Bowl commercials, right? That's like, ironically, that's the Super Bowl of commercials, right? That's like the biggest stage for any advertisement, but they're all competing with each other, right? So they're not trying to compete with the actual Super Bowl, the entertainment people came to watch. They're like, we need to be the best ad during that. And on Twitter specifically, that dynamic is completely flipped on its head. If you are putting out advertisements, you just scroll right past. Like people hate ads in general. So you need to actually be putting out content that you're actually competing with like influencers and what the people are coming to the platform to see instead of other advertisements. So you kind of have to change your content strategy and the way that you're getting attention. And I think like Intern is kind of like one angle that people have taken on that. But it's real. I think the bigger shift is just your brand needs to put out content that people actually want to consume instead of just talking about products and features and kind of how marketing and ads have been done in the past.
I mean, in some senses, it's still similar to how the best ads have always worked. Like the best ads are always about feelings rather than about specific facts. Like I'm going to really butcher this, but it's like if you look just like Google for like the best ads out there, they're, you know, like these full page newspaper ads but it's not like touting the features of the car. It's like talking about, I don't know, just like giving a clever like thought.
Like Nike, impossible is nothing.
Yeah.
Just do it.
Just do it. Wait, that's Adidas. Just do it is
No, Nike.
That's Nike.
Wait, okay, so what's impossible is nothing? Is that also Nike?
No,
Nike's competitor. They fell away. We can't remember.
Puma. I don't know.
But yeah, also the speed, like you need to like keep up with the trends. Like crypto Twitter moves really fast and you need to have a velocity that reflects that as well. I feel like a lot of some of the tweets that have done really well are like fast responses to, what was it? The, pie chart, brutalization.
Yep. That was a good one.
Oh yeah, that one.
That was Renzo? Was it Renzo?
Yeah.
Renzo.
Yeah.
Rest in peace.
Yeah.
Like rest in
They
peace.
live on in infamy forever.
So aside from memes, like in the early days of, by the way, so you say monad.
We say monad. Yeah.
Monad.
Oh, so it's not monad.
Yeah.
I've been saying monad for 2 years.
Same.
I heard you say monad today.
Yeah.
I think.
Okay.
They're both technically right, I think. One's like a British and one's an American, but
So
monad
which
is
way,
kind of the-
which is American? Monad is American, right?
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A monad.
Or maybe not. That might be British. Monad.
Monad.
Yeah.
How to monad.
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 We say monad.
Monad. Okay.
Monad.
Well, I will try to change my.
So in the early days of monad, memes, aside from the meme game, what else was crucial to building the community, the hype around the project?
I would say honestly, not just saying it because Keone's sitting right here, but like there was a small team of us kind of working together, and most people that are trying to build like a professional brand that will grow a lot. Like Keone gave us a lot of freedom to basically say, hey, yeah, if we think this is a good idea, like run with it, see what happens. So that kind of lets the memes flow freely. And then that kind of sets a culture within the community that like, hey, these guys embrace what we actually like to talk about. They're personable, they're relatable, and we can kind of get behind this movement, right? It seems like a brand that you can, relate with and touch and maybe have an impact on. There were a few like early day bootstrapping things on the community front. Like the Discord was locked, right? So it was invite only.
Okay.
And we found that just by having exclusivity, that actually created demand, which was something we didn't expect, right? Usually like, oh, there's this project, I want to join the Discord. The second you can't join the Discord, you're like, you want to join 10 times more. You're like, just because I can't get in, I really want to. So that was one of the really early things. And then during the first fundraise announcement in like February or March of 2023, we put the announcement out and opened the Discord. So like now finally everyone could flood in, big attention event. Bill Monday, who like leads everything on the community front at Monad, has been like massive. I think that early on that hire has had like one of the biggest impacts on the culture of Monad. So like him kind of leading the charge, setting a lot of the tone, being very organic and talking person to person and doing no questing or things that like bots can do has been super important. Now there's a locked Telegram, right? So like the Discord's open, but the Telegram kind of has this exclusive feel. So I think just having a bunch of different outlets, letting the community run free, and then when they do create something that's awesome, like making sure that you highlight that. So like if anyone posts something awesome in the community, like we might put that out on our own Twitter. Like Keone's going to comment or quote tweet and say like, hey, this is awesome. I appreciate that. Like there's a lot of projects in crypto that there's just kind of the community that sits over there and then like they do their own thing. But in this sense, the community is like building the lore, right? They're building the culture that exists in Monad. So when we post it off main, they're like, oh, this is interactive, actually. I'm not just watching a show. I'm actually like playing a video game. Like I'm a part of this. And I think that that's helped a lot on the growth side.
One interesting insight that I've learned about Monad's growth strategy versus others is that interactivity. I've seen the community like bring up more different types of artistic memes. I've seen people build. I saw like a purse, or was it a purse or a Monad character in a purse or something that shipped it to your office? Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, the AirPod cases.
Yeah. I mean, like you start to see these things that I haven't seen from other communities where they actually are building stuff and they're shipping it to you guys. Is that what you're talking about? Like building that trust with the community such that you let them kind of bring and surface up different types of creative ways to get connected with Monad?
I think that's kind of a later stage effect, but in the early days, we couldn't necessarily like expect that was going to happen, and still are consistently blown away by the contribution of individual community members. People are really creative. They're really, contribute very heavily. I would say the community was really built by the community first and foremost. And it's just, the addition of people joining the community and being like, oh, I have something to contribute. Like, oh, I want to make some art that, is like capturing this funny thing that happened in Discord. The inside jokes, the nature of them doesn't specifically matter, but it's more like just having shared lore, having an environment where like people can make friends and hang out. It's also very path dependent. Like, I think our community started growing when during the bear market, when it was like, pretty tough time. A lot of people were a little bit like demoralized by the state of the market and all these bad headlines coming out about Terra and FTX and so on. And just having an environment where they could go hang out and commiserate and have fun and make friends and be creative. That ultimately meant that when new people would join, sometimes they would decide to stick around. It's like, from the team perspective, we're just, trying to make the tree an attractive tree for birds to build a nest. But it's like, how do you attract birds? I don't know, like maybe put out some birds, but it's like it's ultimately the community's choice about whether to come and try things out and contribute, be creative. But what, from a team perspective, what we could do is just appreciate when someone does do something that's really high quality, and also be good about not rewarding things that are not high quality. Like I just talked about this just a second ago, but like one thing that happened was when we opened the Discord on day one, I thought, oh, it's important to reward people who joined on day one. So I'll give them all a role. So I gave them this role called the Pioneer role. And then everyone was like, awesome, I got a role. Like, I'm really excited. And then they stopped doing anything because they already got a role. So then they were like, okay, I got it. And then new people would join and they'd be like, oh, how come I don't have this role? Like, this other person has it and they're not doing anything, but I'm contributing, but I'm not getting it. So then the existence of the role was actually actively negative for people, discouraging people from doing things that would have been good, like just hanging out and vibing and, spending time there. So then eventually, like, I had to kind of like remove the role, or at least remove any like recognition of the role, since it's not separated out. Eventually we did actually get rid of it completely. But it was just having like too low of standards initially was the mistake. Or similarly, like people would make these awful memes that were just copy paste. Like they make the same meme in every Discord, just like putting, substituting like your project's name in place of the other ones. The same one, like Andy discarding Woody because he wants Buzz Lightyear, like, or these memes are all like, there's certain templates, and people would come and they kind of are trained from other projects to do that. Yeah. And it just, if you like acknowledge that and you're tempted to initially because you have no traction and you're like, oh, that person, like they're excited about Monad. They put my name, they put Monad's name on the Discord, or they put my face on the meme. Sorry, I messed up those words. But yeah, they created memes that were like Monad related. That's so great. It's really not. actually. So just having a higher standard. And then if you do that, then you actually discourage people from being more creative. I see that as a common problem in a lot of Discords.
And what's with giving CL a free credit card? Like, what's with that?
Oh, what was with that?
Yeah,
I don't know. I think he was just DMing different people as a joke, saying, "Can you give me your credit card number?" And I think people were just not really responding to him, and then I just did because I was like, okay, sure.
I mean, you get free marketing from him. I mean, is it free actually? Like,
yeah,
he has access to
$8.
$8. Okay,
he's paid. Yeah, he paid for Twitter Premium with that.
I think he's truly unbanked too. So it was like a joke, but he's like, I actually don't have a credit card to buy this with. So.
Yes. So you actually really thought deeply about building the foundational layers of your community. Like, I don't think a lot of founders do that. They just kind of open up their Discord, Telegram, and just kind of like let it rage.
Well, I think it's understandable because there's a lot to do. Like you're building a product, you're growing the team, you're interviewing people, you're maybe like trying to get some publicity, there's a million things to do. And so I think it's understandable that people would low prioritize it.
So let's dive deep into Monad. Obviously, I think there's a lot of news about the work that you're doing, right? As a layer 1, parallelized EVM. I guess the question I want to start with is, how did you come up with this problem set and then this as a solution? Like, why did you think this was the right angle into building this layer 1 up? What problems did you see, and how did you identify this as the right problem to solve?
Yeah. Prior to Monad, James Hunsaker and I, two of the co-founders of Monad, were working together at Jump Trading for 8 years, starting in 2014. We built a high-frequency trading team, built a trading platform from scratch. So we had a lot of experience building really performant systems where, packet would come in from the exchange and we'd have to decide whether to send an order and get the order out in less than a microsecond, which requires extreme attention to detail with respect to system design, architecture, just squeezing latency out of any possible place. And that's the way it is because of competitive forces. Like if a packet comes in and your competitor can react faster than you, then they're the bird that gets the worm. So there's just this incredible force, competitive pressure to be fast. And then fast forward to 2021, James and I ended up joining the crypto team at Jump along with the rest of our trading team, and immediately kind of pivoted and started working on Solana DeFi in particular. So I was learning about Solana itself, learning about some of the existing protocols, and then finding ways to help support some of these protocols that there were portfolio companies of Jump. And during that time, it was really just about 6 months. That was all. We got a kind of whirlwind tour of the state of the world with respect to Solana. We could see that there was a lot of low-hanging fruit in terms of optimizing Solana, and it seemed like the team had a plan for how to do that, but it was still, there's a lot of work that's going into optimizing Solana. And then when we looked at EVM land, which was actually, the dominant smart contract platform by a long shot, 96 to 97% of all TVL on chain is in EVM applications. So very much the dominant standard. And there is even more stark in terms of the performance optimizations that seemed possible just intuitively as people who have built performance systems. But I think anyone would understand that EVM or Ethereum at 10 TPS is very slow relative to what you'd expect to get out of a computer. My MacBook Pro has 100 tabs open and is running Spotify and I don't know, has Discord, memes coming in 1,000 memes per minute.
Yes.
All that stuff.
Pump that fun.
Yeah, right. All of this stuff happening all on one computer. That's just like a normal consumer grade. So we inherently all understand that the system should be capable of much more. But it's just having the confidence from previous experience to know, okay, these are probably where some of the bottlenecks are. so we just left Jump and started Monad at the beginning of 2022, along with the third co-founder, Eunice, who has a technical product management background. And it was just like we knew from day one that there would be a lot of opportunities to improve the execution of Ethereum. And at that time, also a lot of like the focus is really on rollups. It's kind of interesting. 2022, everyone asked us like, great, we love what you're doing. It makes sense, but why not do it as a rollup?
Yeah.
And so I think that there's just so much social pressure that actually meant that like everyone converged on the same thing.
Pressure.
Yeah, but also like just market perception of like, yeah, it's really important for your project to be successful to be a roll up. And I don't know. I mean, we have a lot of respect for teams that are working on roll up technology or working on data availability or working on different other verticals within the Ethereum ecosystem. Like those all have merit as well. But someone has to work on performant execution. Like someone has to go and figure out, how do we make the state database faster? How do we make smart contract execution much more performant? And at that time, it seemed like very few people were working on that. So it was really a case of the stars aligning in terms of our previous experience, the state of the world, like the problem to be solved, and then the lack of people working on that problem just made it a really amazing opportunity at that time.
But what's the trade-off between building Monad as a layer 1 versus as a layer 2? Because the advantage of building as a layer 2 is from the end user's point of view, when they bridge, they basically just deposit ETH to a smart contract, right? Whereas if you build Monad as a layer 1, when the users bridge, they go from one chain to another. It's much higher friction. And this ultimately matters to how you bootstrap the liquidity at the early stage, right? So that's I guess the downside of building as a layer 1. But then you must have thought that there's some upsides of building it as a layer 1 that would outweigh downsides like this. What are the trade-offs?
Yeah, I think to mention really briefly, like 3 major trade-offs. Number 1, decentralization. Number 2, performance. And number 3, cost. So at the end of the day, Monad is a very decentralized network, meaning that there are hundreds of nodes fully globally distributed, all participating in consensus, all alternating whose turn it is to produce blocks. And so as a result of that, there's a much greater degree of censorship resistance and more generally decentralization coming from that decentralized block production. And layer 2s right now don't have that. Like every layer 2 that I've seen has a centralized sequencer. Yep. It means like that one sequencer literally has complete authority on how they're going to order transactions, whether they're going to censor transactions. And so it's just, we're still in a state of the world where the prevailing layer 2s have a high degree of centralization. And you see that sometimes with extreme cases where like the, degen chain had a reorg and
500,000 blocks.
500,000 blocks were reorged because there was an issue with the centralized sequencer that was provided by Conduit. Yeah. Or like there was another thing, like there's like 12 different chains that all have the same multi-sig address that's controlling, the upgrade authority.
That's for Conduit.
They're all using Caldera.
This was yesterday.
I think.
Oh, was that called? No, it was Conduit, I think.
I think it's Conduit.
It's Conduit.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry. Yeah. Well, regardless, like there's
yeah, sorry.
There's many examples of like, we're just not at the current state of the world. And yes, like everyone is working to try to make these systems more decentralized, more robust, more performant, et cetera. But we just really felt at that point in time and still feel now that we can contribute substantially to the goal of decentralization by delivering really high performance while preserving a high degree of decentralization. Yeah. And that's actually important because then we're ultimately giving people a better point on the if you imagine like a two-dimensional curve of like decentralization and performance, we're actually moving like up and to the right, finding a better isocline on that spectrum of decentralization and performance by getting much more out of the hardware.
Yeah.
So that was the first reason. The second and third reasons, performance and cost, are very tied to each other. But with Monad is really performant and really cheap. And it's that way because we control all layers of the stack, both execution and consensus. We're not worrying about like is there a data availability layer that's sufficiently cheap that can, then like give us, give cheap transactions, like just
So
by
we actually
controlling all parts.
talked about this yesterday, if you remember. But it sounds like it's actually easier to build a high performance chain as a layer 1 than as an Ethereum layer 2, because when you build as an Ethereum layer 2, you have to work around the constraints of the EVM and the database, all that stuff. Is that
And the Ethereum dependency too.
the dependencies and
So with Monad, we have actually rebuilt the database. Like we have rebuilt the EVM. So everything was built from scratch and still is compliant with the EVM.
right?
So I think from a standards perspective, that's always been a constraint, but it's always been the first order, like most important thing is delivering full bytecode compatibility so that developers don't have to like worry about whether the system is actually still compatible.
Right.
But yeah, I think it's like we say with everything else, there's no shortcuts. Like to deliver a really performant system, there's no shortcuts. You just have to go straight at where the bottlenecks are and address them.
So how easy is it to port over an app to Monad?
It's completely trivial. It's completely easy. Monad is fully bytecode compatible.
Okay.
So any app that you have the bytecode that's already deployed to Ethereum, you could redeploy that bytecode to Monad without any change.
I think the hard part is porting the liquidity, not the code.
Well, liquidity farming.
Yeah. Oh, on the point about bridging, because you were talking about how, like I think of a layer 2 as a blockchain. Like it's still a blockchain. It still has like blocks. It still has transactions in the block. It still has an execution system for processing those. I think of it as a blockchain that right now has like one node, that one sequencer that's running the blockchain, and then is pushing data back to layer 1. And by pushing data back to layer 1 enables an enshrined bridge. And so that bridge in some senses has some nice properties. Like the layer 1 is holding state commitment which is like a summary of all the state on the layer 2. So you can be sure that if the layer 2 disappears, people can still withdraw money out of that bridge contract, subject to certain, terms and conditions, like wait 7 days, things like that. Yep. But the UX of these bridges is still not that great either. Like you can bridge into an optimistic rollup like immediately, but then to withdraw, you wait 7 days. That's like crazy long. So then in practice, people just end up using fast bridge solutions. Like, layer 0 has, what do you call it? What's the like liquidity pool solution built on top of layers? Stargate, yeah.
Stargate.
Layer 0 has Stargate, or Axelar has Squid, or there's like people just end up in practice using these like liquidity solutions anyway.
Right.
And that's going to be true whether you're bridging to layer 1 or layer 2.
Right. I mean, conceptually, yes. But when you're on the layer 2, you can actually use native ETH on the layer 2. But if you want to use Monad, you don't have native ETH there. So you would have to use native Monad, the native token on Monad, or something. I think that this is the biggest friction.
Yeah, that's true. That is, but there are ways of addressing that as well. Like people could just have the ability to like swap from native token on one chain to native token on another chain.
Yeah,
like that's enabled by some of these fast bridges as well.
Yeah. But my point is, ETH is a battle tested asset. It has a lot of liquidity, less volatility than the newer assets, the newer native tokens. And people are comfortable with the idea of using ETH.
For sure, yeah.
I would just point out too, right? Like there's certainly one crypto asset that is more battle tested and has more liquidity, right? Which is Bitcoin, and people use wrap Bitcoin on ETH too.
Right.
So, there's no like direct solution for that, but there are certainly ways that people are comfortable using new chains now. Like I feel like when we think about a lot of the risks and making sure the user experience is great, that's maybe on the list, but not like some of the, like one of the top issues I feel like people need to have addressed to use Monad.
Right.
I would also just say regarding the more general like line of questioning about being a part of the Ethereum ecosystem. And, there's certain things that are very conventional ways of being, a participant in the Ethereum ecosystem as a separate blockchain. And one of those is having the enshrined layer 2 bridge with either the optimistic rollup mechanism or the ZK rollup mechanism. That's one thing. And then a subcomponent of that is whether the layer 2 uses Ethereum as data availability or whether it does not. Like, there's a bunch of layer 2s that are now using Celestia or EigenDA, or maybe even Avail as their DA solutions. They're not actually paying for ETH DA. So, there's a spectrum of like ways that layer 2s are following the initial like quote unquote ground rules of being a part of the Ethereum ecosystem, and it's shifting over time. But I believe that there are other ways to be a part of the Ethereum ecosystem. And I think in particular, contributing to the Ethereum research community by going really deep and doing deep focused research into scaling improvements that ultimately are needed by Ethereum and are beneficial to Ethereum, that's another way to contribute as well. And I think that just in general, we shouldn't always just take the obvious route as the way to be a participant or as the solution to anything. Like with a lot of things we've done in Monad, it's like, don't just follow the playbook. Like think about what actually makes sense, what can add value to whoever the other participant is. Like in the context of community, it was not just following the playbook of like, using questing platforms and outsourcing the community development to like a marketing agency. Not doing that, but instead starting from first principles and being like, well, this is why people would want to be in the Monad community. This is like what we think people want. And let's talk to them and listen and, adapt and give a high quality product. We always said the community is the product. So that means we had a focus on actually like coming up with a playbook from scratch that we just thought would make sense in resulting in a high quality product. So I would say the same thing kind of applies here with respect to involvement in the Ethereum ecosystem. Like, yeah, the playbook is be a layer 2, utilize ETH for DA, and that's fine. Like it's fine for people to do that, but it doesn't mean that's the only way. Like there are other ways to actually contribute meaningfully to Ethereum.
Do you see any layer 2 that can compete with Monad performance-wise and fees-wise, or even has a path towards competing with Monad?
Our team is just writing software. So at the end of the day, like we always say this within our team, everything is just software. So yes, any other team could put in the effort to write really performant software that allows that blockchain, whether it's a layer 2 or a layer 1 or a layer 3.
But do you see any team that's really focusing on performance today among the layer 2 teams?
I don't.
What about Mega ETH? Have you heard of them?
I've heard of them.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you see them finding this achievable path?
I think that they've stated a desire to do that.
Okay.
I think it's still super early right now, so it's really hard to judge any anything that they've done so far. But I think they have the right goal in mind.
Okay.
Do you think when Monad launches on Mainnet, can it compete with? Is it on the same order of magnitude as Solana, Aptos, Sui in terms of performance?
I think so. Yeah. I think that the 3 that you mentioned are all really performant systems that have put a ton of effort into systems engineering and addressing bottlenecks. Solana in particular, I know has, a lot of areas where they proactively determine like, oh, this is actually really inefficient. We can do something way better and are, on the path to making that better, I'm sure.
Yeah. Even with the Fire Dancer, do you think Monad can compete?
I think so, yeah.
So what camp are you in? Are you in the modular camp like Vitalik? Or are you in the monolithic camp like Anatoly? Because, even without, obviously everything's permissionless and we're starting to see layer 2s around Solana. That's regardless. But I guess how do you view the two schools of thoughts and where do you kind of side with?
I mostly reject the question because I think they're not really in opposition. I think that the goal of any blockchain system design team should be to get as much performance and as many useful features as possible out of the hardware, which maybe you would characterize as a monolithic skew. But I don't really think that's true. I think that's just common sense. Like, if we have a system that has a couple hundred nodes or 1,000 nodes, so there's literally 1,000 people paying for server costs, and the requirement is like 32 gigs of RAM and this network bandwidth. If we're going to invest all of that cost into all this infrastructure, we should want to get as much performance out of that as possible. And that's just true regardless of how that system is, whether that system is portrayed as like a layer 1 or a data availability solution or a layer 2. I think there's merit in fractal scaling, aka rollups. So I think there is merit in saying, there's separate blockchains that push some sort of commitment back to some other blockchain, and thus, make the bridge between those blockchains more secure in some sense. I think there's totally merit to that, but I think that's a completely separate concern from like how efficient is each one of those layers. And I think that, it would be like saying, I'm going to have to conjure an analogy out of my butt right now. But I don't know. It's just like saying, do we want our cities to be very efficient? Do we want to have like really good like subway system and highways and like thriving businesses within the city? Or do we want to have the airplane travel be really efficient between cities? And, then, like those are not at odds with each other. Like we should want to have really efficient cities and also have very seamless travel.
Embrace it all.
Really cheap travel between the different cities. So people can be world travelers. When they go to a city, like that city should be a pleasant place to hang out.
That was a good one out of thin air.
Thank you.
Good.
Thank you. Yeah. yeah. So then, it's like, the talking head is like, well, like, do you like airplanes more? Should we invest more in airplanes or should we invest more in subway systems? And I guess if we have a limited budget, then you'd have to decide. But the amazing thing about this startup ecosystem is that there's room for both and people can focus on different things.
So I think Anatol's doing the right thing. He's just focusing on scaling the layer 1. And then permissionlessly, you have layer 2s that are building on its own. And they could build their own like communities and subsidies, right? How did you guys come up with the meme, the actual character for Monad?
Which one?
The purple one.
Probably the Molendak.
Yes.
Looks like a hedgehog porcupine.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because, we have founders that are looking for, I'm switching topics here because we have a lot of founders that want to embrace the community and they want to have some sort of like character that represents their company, right? How did you tap into that and create this kind of character?
I would actually say that dependent on like the right strategy for a team that's trying to build a community, like the character, what people rally around changes depending on what stage you're at. So like really early on, Molendak didn't exist. And there's like a whole farm of Mon animals now, right? There's Molendak, Moyaki, Mooch.
There's a fly.
Yeah, Mooch is the fly.
Is that Mooch?
Yeah,
Okay.
French Nads came up with him recently.
Okay.
And forced him upon the community. So now
It's not bad. I like it.
He's a good underdog.
But so early on, like when you're bootstrapping is different from when you're kind of in like this scale up phase.
Yep.
So really early on, there was actually just like normal Pepe and we made him purple because no one knows what Monad is. Everyone knows what Pepe is.
Oh, that's right. You had a purple Pepe.
So that was actually the kind of the first iteration. We knew eventually once we got big enough, we kind of have to move away from that, right? It's not really that original. It's hard to rally around that with a large amount of people.
And but it might come to you.
It's a good one where you're like, oh, I recognize the character. And then if you see it purple enough, you're like, oh, I relate to it. And I know that this is Monad. So early on, that was actually the kind of like the rallying call or the character that was in a lot of the art that was being created. Molendak sprung completely bottom up out of the community, specifically out of Indonesia. Landak means porcupine in Indonesia. So which I didn't realize until like 4 months after the Molendak has been a character. So they just created him and started memeing him, and the community just like fell in love with it, right? They're like, this character's awesome. They started putting him on pictures. They had him do different things. It was almost like Flat Stanley, where he's traveling around the world, and like he's just in a lot of the art. And at that stage, a lot of the art coming out of the community is like definitely better than anything I can create or anyone on the team can create. So the best art that's being made is coming straight from the community. They're putting Molendak in all of it. So then it kind of goes back into our like positive feedback loop of, if we're tweeting off of main and encouraging from all of like the team accounts, the community's like, oh my God, we just memed this character into like the centerpiece of Monad. This is awesome. They feel like more encouraged and more motivated. It's just a lot more fun for everyone. So it honestly just grew directly out of the community, completely made by them. And
that's great.
Yeah.
I think specifically we should give a shout out to a person in the community, Sapphire, who just uploaded this photo to the Discord, and it was called molendak.jpg, and it was a little bit of a, you know, like a mic drop. Like he just uploaded it and then didn't say anything, and then people were like, what is it called? I think it's called Molendak because it was molendak.jpg. But yeah, I mean, the way I think about community is it's like the contributions of a number of incredible individuals who each bring different, like, unexpected moments of joy, and are also like appreciators of that, and are just having a good time, like spending time with each other. Again, in the bear market, like commiserating with each other a little bit. And ultimately, you know, that has resulted in incredible strength that we could not have predicted. You know, the strength of the Monad community at this point now is beyond wildest expectations, at least for me personally. And I think it's just the result of incredible individuals, like just, you know, being creative and putting themselves out there, and then riffing on each other. And like, so yeah, the reason why Molendak, like if you search Molendak on Google Images, like you'll actually get a bunch of memes of Molendak doing different, and they're really good. They're really high quality. This is not just, you know, one person creating all the memes. It's like, it's people like responding to each other, and the lore getting increasingly complex. And I'm just really appreciative of it, and feel like, you know, all that we could do is just, you know, put in place, like make the community an environment that is conducive to that. Like, you know, kick out spammers, don't encourage bots, showcase great work that people have done, and, you know, just try to like keep up and try to, you know, appreciate what's going on.
I think on that point too, there's a lot of overlap in the ideology, or like what we talk about as a team, from the engineering side to the community side. Like Keone talked about, when they were like coming up with Monad, everyone was like, go and do an L2. There was like a playbook, right? They're like, hey, if you want to build something that has value in crypto, like this is the playbook, follow that. And Keone and James basically looked at it and they're like, it's not really the best way to do it, right? We see the true bottlenecks. Let's go and do the hard stuff, even though no one else is doing it. And then if you do it well, right, you're actually going to create something that has a meaningful impact. On the community front, I think like community and marketing kind of being intertwined and working together is very much the same thing, right? They're like, oh, you're trying to get people in the Discord, like run a Galaxy Quest, right? Like tweet out this thing, try to get as many people in there as possible. And we looked at it, and I like credit Bill Monday with a ton of this, but like we have 2 meetings every week. We probably talk about community more than any other team in crypto, but like we're talking through this. We're like, I actually don't think doing these quests, like, yeah, you might get, you know, the fire might burn really bright for a second. You get a bunch of likes on a tweet, but I actually don't think that creates a good community experience. Like if you were in the community, would you want to do that? So we're like, yeah, all right, this is going to be a longer path. It's going to require a lot more effort and bandwidth. But if you want to build something lasting and important, like don't just follow this playbook that everyone else has done, right? Like make it make sense from first principles, make it fun and interactive, and then expand from there. So yeah, I think once there are so many things in crypto. It's like once the playbook has been written, it's obsolete.
We just talked about this morning, that especially for consumer founders, any consumer app you're building has to follow a new playbook. Otherwise, you're just one of them, right? And you're comped against that app or that company. So that's a really good point.
Yeah, I think people in crypto are smart. That's maybe something that sounds obvious, but is just like worth contemplating for a second. So if they see you like just following a playbook, just copying someone else, they're going to realize like, oh, that's not original. So that's not something that really like catches my attention.
The first person to do it always works the best too.
Yeah.
Right. Like there are so many different things in crypto, right? Like the first airdrops were all the most successful. And now it's like, exactly. The first, like, think about when Arbitrum was doing their L2, right? There wasn't a playbook. So they had to kind of create this. And now look at who's like the most successful L2, right? Like Arbitrum's kind of dominating on most metrics. From a community standpoint, like I'm sure whoever was the first one to do questing, I don't know who it was, but I bet they got a lot of really good engagement. And now that it's just been done so many times, it like points programs. The first team, like I remember when Friendtech started doing points, it's like MarginFi, Friendtech, and maybe one other that were
Blur.
Yeah, doing points. It's like it worked really well. And now it's almost like if someone announces a points program, they're like, oh, all right, fine.
It should be part of it, right?
Yeah.
Don't do it.
So I think like these are good ideas that stack on top of each other and make a better ecosystem overall. But you can't just like hang your hat on some, like if you everything you're doing is playbook, like there's going to be nothing that's interesting or, creating value.
Technical question. I'm sure you're building a lot of you're doing a lot of optimizations to make the chain really, really fast. But what would you say is the number one or top one or top two most important areas of optimization you're making?
Yeah, I'll give you two. So number one is the state database. So we've built a database from scratch for storing Ethereum Merkle tree data and utilizing the full bandwidth of the SSD much more efficiently than when embedding the Merkle tree inside of another database. So SSDs are quite powerful nowadays. They get better every year by quite a significant margin. A high quality 2 terabyte SSD with 1 million IOPS, aka 1 million IO operations per second, you can get it for $200. It's an amazing piece of technology, and we should be maximizing the capabilities of that, because the single biggest bottleneck for execution is state access, and the state lives on the SSD. So with this piece of software, MonadDB, we are storing Ethereum Merkle tree data natively, like on the disk in a custom format that makes it really efficient to read pieces of data from that Merkle tree, and also to read in parallel, thus utilizing that high bandwidth that's on the SSD. And that's what accelerates execution the most. Of course, parallel execution on top of that is really important, because then we can run many threads in parallel to surface many dependencies, pull a lot of data from disk in parallel. But the actual software has to utilize that bottleneck really efficiently. So that's the first thing. And then the other thing is asynchronous execution. I think that ultimately every blockchain will utilize asynchronous execution because it's a better model for splitting up the work between consensus and execution to enable execution to use the full amount of block time. So for context, in Ethereum and most other blockchains, execution and consensus are interleaved. So in particular, usually what will happen is the leader chooses a list of transactions somehow, and then executes all those transactions, gets to the end state after executing those, and only after that goes and messages the block out to all the other validating nodes. And then all the other validating nodes receive that block, so they receive that list of transactions, and then has to go execute it and get the end state before voting on whether that block was valid or not. So as you can see in this entire story, like this was kind of a description of the full production and consensus of one block. And in that story, you have like multiple rounds of execution happening that are all squeezed into a larger amount of work being done. And the problem is that work involves communication among nodes, which are potentially on opposite sides of the world. So that's going to be very expensive, which means that the budget for execution is actually very limited in these interleaved systems. So for context, Ethereum has 12-second block times, but the budget for execution is roughly 100 milliseconds, which is 1% of the block time. So what that means is that there's this huge shrinking factor of time where, although, there's like, within that 12-second period, we're only having a very small amount of time to do work. So you just can't do very much work. So with Monad, with asynchronous execution, what happens is the nodes come to consensus first. So you can think of that as like consensus is in one swim lane. And then once that consensus completes on that block, then two things can happen in parallel. The first is consensus can happen on the next block, but in parallel, execution can happen over that first block. So thus, the execution budget is now the full block time, which is a massive unlock for the overall execution throughput of the system. And so, like I was saying, I think that every blockchain will ultimately adopt this. It requires some tweaks to how consensus and execution interact with each other. There's like some safety checks still that are needed. There's some spam prevention checks. But at the end of the day, this is a way better system that can utilize all the capabilities of the hardware in a much greater way. And I think that everyone, for example, Solana, I think Tolly has been tweeting about how he thinks asynchronous execution makes sense, and Solana may adopt this. Like, I think every blockchain will be like this at some point.
I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like the whole parallel EVM is kind of a meme, because the second thing you mentioned has nothing to do with the parallel execution. And the first thing is not directly parallel execution either. It enables parallel execution, right?
Right. Yeah, we have a blog post actually that's in progress, which is actually called Parallel EVM as a meme. And it's a reflection of the fact that consistently the thing that resonated the most with people was parallel EVM, because that makes sense. And it is important. Like, it is important to get the most out of the hardware, and computers have many processors, and they have the ability to run many threads. Like, don't get me wrong, parallelism is important, but I think when someone's just learning about like Monad or Solana or whatever, it's just the thing that sticks in their brain. Like, I think consistently, if you ask people like, why is Solana more performant than Ethereum? What they'll say is, oh, because it can run transactions in parallel.
Yeah.
And it's like, yeah, that's true, but that's also only one small part of the story. Like, the other part is that, Solana has a team of engineers who originally worked at Qualcomm, who were building high performance systems, who made the system really performant in all these other ways.
Yeah.
So it's like, it's true, but it's only a small part of the whole story.
Does Sui and Aptos use asynchronous execution?
I don't think so.
Okay. But so you're the only one that's doing it?
I think so.
Okay, interesting.
Flow does that also, actually.
Flow, okay.
Yeah, Flow blockchain from Dapper Labs.
Okay.
Writing the playbook.
Because I'm not entirely familiar with how asynchronous execution works, but I remember seeing a diagram of that with Move, with Libra. So they definitely thought about it, designed it. Maybe they haven't implemented it yet.
Yeah, I'm not the expert. I think they definitely do some other really interesting things, like moving some of the work out of the hot path. And there's also like Aptos and Sui, and they do different things. So I probably shouldn't comment on it. But yeah, I mean, if either they do and then that makes sense, or they don't and they probably will at some point.
And also parallel execution, like some of the layer 2s already do that too. Like Polygon has parallel execution.
Does it?
Yeah.
Yeah, so they have parallel execution, but don't have a performant state database.
Right.
So, the magnitude of the improvement just from the parallel execution without a performant state database that can serve requests from all of these transactions running in parallel efficiently is going to be much more limited.
Yeah.
I think the marketing guys on their team probably deserve a raise on a lot of those teams. Because it's like, if it's the easiest thing to understand, if you can say, but like everyone just thinks that that's the key.
Yeah.
You can just say, oh, we're just going to do this one part. And then everyone's like, oh, well, that's Monad. it's a good trick is probably the wrong word, but it's a good thing to be able to push out. I respect their game. Yeah.
So when mainnet?
Yeah, we can't commit to it publicly to a specific date, but team's working on it really hard.
Okay. But ballpark, is it 1 year or 2 years, 3 years? Ballpark.
It's not 2 years or 3 years.
Okay.
Yeah.
Faster than 2 or 3 years.
For sure, yeah.
Yeah.
For sure.
Going back to your earlier question on incentives, on why, like if you think about what Blast did, they released Blast Gold and Blast Points as a way to encourage developers to build and users to use their products. If you were to, as you're designing probably internally the incentive systems, how would you think about it for users and builders that are thinking about building on Monad?
I'll probably let Keone comment on it, but I would say if we're following this whole playbook theme throughout, if you're writing a playbook and you can't use it for a number of months, you're probably not going to discuss it too much,
right?
In case someone else hops in to take it. It's a really important thing to get right.
Okay.
I don't know if Keone has anything else to add, but I would say like there's a mix of things that like obviously definitely work and are kind of tried and true in crypto. And there's a lot of untapped things that are worth experimenting with. So yeah, I think it would follow the same, do the right thing, even if it's the hard thing. There's no shortcuts to getting people on. But I don't know, right now in terms of people coming on to build, like there's just a lot of general excitement.
It's good.
Right? There's kind of two places of crypto blockchains right now, right? You have EVM and then you have like performant, and there's just nothing in the middle. So people that want to build really performant apps, they like have to choose either like SVM and MoveVM really kind of dominate that side. So they have to choose one of these blockchains because their app requires it to function. And then on the other side, you have EVM, which has like the vast majority of devs, like 90% plus of people are building for the EVM, but they don't have the opportunity to actually build applications that require high performance. So I think when you mesh those together, like people's imaginations kind of spark. The same way when people first start building on the Solana, they're like, oh, there's all this awesome stuff that now I can do, that I can optimize for and create these cool new features. That just hasn't existed for the EVM yet. So I think like very smart people's imaginations is a really cool thing to tap into. So like we talk to a lot of devs who have built awesome things in the past, and they're like, I haven't been given a new design space to look at for a very long time. So like I'm excited about Monad just for that.
Yep. So it seems like the tech is already bringing the people in, so you don't really have to.
Yeah.
Okay.
Tech and Molendak.
Yeah. And Molendak. Yeah, of course. Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, I still want to go back to an earlier question about like how you see yourself against the Ethereum layer 2s in terms of performance. What would you say is what are the top 5, maybe top 3 to 5 Ethereum layer 2s? How would you rank the top 5 in terms of performance? So I'll give you a few options. There's Eclipse that's trying to move the SVM to Ethereum. I don't know why you're smiling, but there's also Movement, who tries to bring Move to Ethereum, and then there's Arbitrum working on Stylus. There's what else is there? There's a bunch of ZK rollups as well.
ZK rollups.
Yeah. Like, how would you rank them performance wise? Or it's hard to say.
I think it's very hard to say. Yeah. I think that they're kind of optimizing for different things. But I think that...
Do you think bringing the SVM or the MoveVM to Ethereum can, reach within one order of magnitude to Monad in terms of performance?
No, I think that at the end of the day, the EVM is extremely important. It's important because most developers are building for the EVM. They want to build for a common standard. They don't want to have the vendor lock-in problem of building for an alternative standard and then being very limited in where they can redeploy. And also the EVM is really powerful. Like it's very battle tested. It's getting better every day. There's better tooling every day. And also like for Monad and for other research orgs, there's an effort to make the EVM better over time by adding support for new precompiles or opcodes or behaviors. So it's not just a static thing, but it is, in my opinion, the most important thing. It's like where the developers want to be. Therefore, it's
Let
the
me
important
rephrase.
thing.
Can Eclipse be as fast and cheap as Solana? And can movement be as fast and as cheap as Aptos and Sui?
I think so. I mean, there's no inherent reason that they couldn't. And in some senses, there is an advantage in the sense that they don't have to have consensus. So that, removes overhead. But on the other hand, they're limited by the cost and availability of the DA, which you really haven't seen battle tested in any significant way.
Right.
And DAs are really just, or like a good DA, like a good decentralized data availability layer, is really like kind of like a layer one itself. Like it has consensus, it has globally distributed nodes, there's fault tolerance, there's Byzantine fault tolerance. So, so there's some bad actors amongst the nodes. System can still stay up and still serve the purpose. It's basically a layer one. So we would need to see those DA systems be performant to the degree of a high performance layer one with high performance consensus, which I'm actually a little bit skeptical about, because the DA also has to be performant and decentralized, globally distributed, which means high performance consensus, which to my knowledge doesn't really exist right now. Like the DAs are using Tendermint under the hood. That's a very limited consensus mechanism that can support up to 100 nodes. Like often the nodes end up getting co-located. They're very close to each other. There are issues. So anyway, that's like one specific thread of thought I have about, high performance layer twos and the bottleneck being DA. I think the other thing though, which actually I feel is more important, is what do users ultimately want? Like where will users ultimately go? And to what extent, like you're asking, like, will Eclipse be more performant than Solana? But I think the more interesting question is, why would users go to Eclipse instead of going to Solana, given that it's the same apps? And the answer that people have given is like, oh, it's because Eclipse is more Ethereum aligned. And I just have a hard time imagining.
But my answer is native ETH. The ETH, the asset, can go to Eclipse natively, and you cannot go to Solana natively. And ETH is a great asset that a lot of people hold.
I see.
Solana is a pretty good asset.
Solana is a pretty good asset. It's getting there.
There are trade-offs. Yeah. I mean, I do think that for any layer one, building a brand is like, the brand is a very important part. And the brand is like the community. It's the feelings that people have about like being in that environment, using apps there. So, I would say right now, like the challenge of being something that is a little bit something else is actually building a coherent brand, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Oh, actually, one thing.
Yes.
I tweeted the other day, like, what's your favorite meme template? And I was hoping that I could bait Intern into replying with his favorite meme template.
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't see.
But I know what your favorite meme is.
Which one?
It has to be the bell curve.
That's everyone's favorite.
Yeah,
it's the meme template of the decade.
It has to be the bell curve.
It is one of the best memes of all time. So my favorite thing with meme templates is when you get a good template and then you remix it. So it still is the same template, but it's like a different variation of it. My little brother was the first person I ever saw doing this. I'm like, these are the best things I've ever seen.
Wow.
Like, please keep doing this, because these will hit. Because like you get used to seeing the meme format.
Yep.
And then when you see the same format, it's like the purple Pepe, right? You're like, I get it. This is a new take on it. And I love that.
You have some affiliation, just like Dog Whiff hat, right? Like you see the hat and you're like, oh, okay. And then it's on someone else, like Trump or Biden or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Remixed popular formats, I think, is
memes.
like my favorite. It's a little esoteric of an answer, but
Mashups.
yeah. I like the chess one that Sherlock Hoddles was the first guy I ever saw post it.
Oh, that one? That was a good one.
That's a really good
chess
template.
one.
We don't have to dive too far into that one.
Yeah, we
but
don't need to.
It's on my timeline a little bit ago.
Oh, I forgot to ask you this. What do you think about Hyperliquid? I didn't look into it, but everyone's just like, oh, a Monad competitor. I haven't looked into it at all.
That's the new meme.
It's like they're trying to meme this. So I'm just trying to understand if you have looked into it, if you can comment on it, thoughts.
I would say that's middle of the bell curve.
Okay.
Thinking.
Perfect. I haven't looked into it, but.
And I'll say I like them in case they watch this so that you can have both sides of it. A lot of people that I know that I really respect their opinion think that it's a cool thing that's worth pursuing.
I don't even know what they're doing. So that's why I was curious. And in terms of why they're comparing Monad to Hyperliquid at all.
If I was on the Hyperliquid team, I would for sure be doing. That's a great.
It's a good meme. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So it's a meme. Okay. Perfect. Yeah. All right. We'll leave it at that. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll catch you guys next time.
Thanks for having us.
Yep.
Thanks.
As always, the views expressed in the Good Game podcast are personal to the speakers and do not necessarily reflect the views of any other person or entity. Nothing here should be construed or relied upon as investment, legal, tax, or other advice.
Thanks for listening to Good Game. Don't forget to subscribe. We'll see you next week.